My question to you is, what is the earliest of the canonical hadith sources that you have?
No. Quran is itself is let's say independence itself. Quran is Quran.
Well,
And
what are you
hadith
talking
is the-
about?
Hadith is the word of Rasul, is the Prophet.
You don't
Hadith
need-
is the word of the Prophet. Quran is the word of God.
No. You're giving me your belief statements right now. I'm not asking you for your belief statements. I'm trying to analyze this in a historical manner.
Abu Bakr, about Uthman.
Exactly.
You don't need to go to heaven. You don't need to know them. You need to do
What?
arcane
Hey,
Islam.
wow.
Hold on.
No, wait. No, you're confusing me right now. You're confusing me right now. No. My confusion.
Different questions at the same time.
No, one second. My point to you is, would you like to know, if you need to go to, you understand there are multiple religions today on the face of the earth, don't you?
Yeah.
There is Christianity, which doesn't have Abu Bakr, no Umar, no Uthman, none of these people. There is Islam, which has Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and so on. Now, you are telling me to go to heaven, you don't need to know about Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman.
You don't need.
But if I were to tell you that Abu
If you
Bakr,
want to learn about Islam, you have to know.
let me finish.
But
Let me finish.
Okay, finish.
If I were to tell you that the entire idea of Islam is a fantasy story, that none of these people actually existed, wouldn't you want to know that if that is true or not?
It's
If
definitely
Islam
not
is a
true.
fantasy, could you go to heaven with Islam?
What do you mean by fantasy?
I.e. fiction, i.e. not historical, i.e. Muhammad.
We never
No
said
one.
historical.
Let me finish, please. Let me finish. If these things are not true at all, if Muhammad, for example, didn't exist, Muhammad of Islam didn't exist at all, if Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman didn't exist at all, then clearly Islam is a fantasy idea.
In the field of critical historical studies on early Islam, scholars often highlight the gap between traditional claims and evidence that can be materially or textually verified. Archaeological data, administrative documents, and external testimony suggest that the formation of the Quran's textual identity and the prophetic narrative did not occur during Muhammad's lifetime, but developed gradually over the following decades. Clear archaeological evidence containing explicit Quranic verses can only be traced with certainty to the late 7th century. One example is the inscription on the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, installed in 691-692 CE. While this inscription does quote portions of the Quran, its appearance comes nearly 60 years after Muhammad's death. From outside the Muslim tradition, the testimony of John of Damascus, writing in the late 7th to early 8th century, also confirms that Muslims possessed a book, yet this reference emerges long after the earliest period of Islam. Meanwhile, during the period traditionally regarded as the era of the first caliphs, Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman, there is no contemporary coinage, inscription, or official document that records their names alongside the titles attributed to them. Early Arab coins still retained Byzantine or Sasanian styles, and administrative papyri merely show the transfer of power to Arab authorities without naming specific leaders. This absence makes their historical existence difficult to verify outside of the Islamic narrative, which itself was compiled centuries later. Significant changes appear in the early Abbasid period in the latter half of the 8th century. It is during this time that a complete biography of the Prophet, such as that by Ibn Ishaq, emerges, alongside the large-scale compilation of hadith. This historical narrative was organized systematically, with a structured chronology, in line with the political needs of the new dynasty to secure religious legitimacy. It is this process that firmly placed the Quran within the historical and theological framework we recognize today. Defenders of the traditional view sometimes point to administrative papyri, such as Perf 558, dated to 643 CE, as evidence that the Quran existed in the early period. However, this document only confirms the use of a governmental system with the Hijri calendar without touching on the presence of a canonical mushaf. Another piece of evidence often cited is the Quranic fragment known as the Birmingham Folios, radiocarbon dated to between 568 and 645 CE. Crucially, this dating measures the age of the parchment itself, not the moment the text was written, leaving open the possibility that its content was compiled or edited in a later period. Taken together, the available evidence continues to reveal a significant historiographical gap before the Quran and the life of Muhammad were fully codified in the Abbasid era.
Which means Islam could not help you go to heaven.
There
Could
is
it?
no connection with that.
The Bible.
Could,
It's like-
could
it's
fantasy
like-
ideas, one second.
It's
Could,
like- it's
could
like-
fantasy
I will
ideas,
tell you. It's like it's
could
like,
fantasy
I will
ideas,
answer you.
good.
It's like if you ask if I am as a human body is not here, is not exist.
are you
Do we
talking
need to drink water? It's the same. Water is essential for us as human, and Quran is essential for us
Who
as
told you?
as
Who,
Muslims.
if this is the word of God,
This is the word.
how do you know it? Is the question.
We know
I'm
it
ask-
from generation to
How,
generation.
how?
You say it's
Now, the
fantasy.
first few generations I can't see at all. So I'm asking you, the first, how do you know anything about the origin, the history of the origin of the Quran? That's my question. You're talking about generations as if you know who wrote the Quran down, when it was written down, and who the Sahabas were, and so on. My question is, how do you know these things?
Because in our books it's written exactly
Which books?
where from our Islamic books.
Which
this
books?
question, hold on. This question,
Which books?
how could ask the same question to the Bible?
I'm sure.
Hold on
I'm
a minute,
talking about the
hold on.
Quran right
I
now.
would ask you the same question to the Bible.
Absolutely.
All right. In the Bible, how do you think this is 100% sure? In one thing, I'm going to answer this question.
Good question. I'd like to answer now.
Right. Yeah,
Could
okay.
I answer?
You can.
Good. So, Jesus and the crucifixion of Jesus is the person of Jesus and the crucifixion of Jesus is a well-attested historical fact, attested by contemporary historical sources, namely the Christian sources, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and so on. These are Christian sources. There are one second. Let me finish.
They were eyewitness.
Can I finish?
Okay.
There are non-Christian historical resources also, like the Roman non-Christian historian, namely Tacitus, Suetonius, Pliny the Younger, the Greek non-Christian writer, namely Lucian of Samosata. That's a Jewish non-Christian writer, namely Josephus. All these people write about the historicity of Jesus Christ, the historicity of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. In other words, the person of Jesus Christ is firmly fixed in history. In other words, if you were to come to me and ask me for early evidence of the person of Jesus Christ, I could not alone give you Bible, I could also give you non-biblical, non-Christian resources. I'm asking the same question. That is exactly what I'm asking. For the Quran.
Okay, I will tell you.
One second. For people like Abu Bakr, Uthman, Umar, to understand the historical backdrop of when this book was written, in what context and so on, what are the historical resources you are going to cite? That's my question. You
Okay.
haven't answered me so far.
I have told you already. So you are already here and you know the books, the resources with the names. We have even non-Muslims books sources.
Which ones?
But we don't know the names. Can you name
Which
some?
ones?
There are many.
Non-Muslim, non-Islamic sources which record Abu Bakr, Uthman, Umar.
There is many.
What, you mean the combiners?
Yeah, non-Muslim source. He thinks there are non-Islamic sources which record the historicity of the Sahaba. He thinks so. I'm asking you, do you know any of them? He doesn't know. You don't know. Is there anyone who knows anything?
Knows about what?
Knows about the origin of Islam.
The origin of Islam?
That's right. Origin of the Quran. To understand the historical backdrop of the way in which the Quran was written, do you have any historical resource? Early historical resource? Anyone? Sorry, apologies.
In the field of critical historical studies, the existence of Jesus of Nazareth is supported not only by Christian sources, but also by non-Christian evidence, both material and textual. From the epigraphic side, for example, we have the Pilate inscription discovered at Caesarea Maritima, which explicitly names Pontius Pilatus, Prefectus Judaeae. This confirms that the Roman official who presided over Jesus' trial was indeed a historical figure, leaving behind archaeological evidence that can be scientifically verified. Another example is the so-called Nazareth Decree, a Greek-language marble inscription prohibiting the disturbance or removal of bodies from tombs. While it does not mention Jesus by name, its date and place of discovery have led some scholars to link it with a Roman response to the early Christian proclamation of the resurrection. Archaeological evidence also includes ossuaries, bone boxes, bearing names of New Testament figures. The Caiaphas ossuary, for instance, found in Jerusalem, bears the inscription Yehoseph bar Caiapha, likely referring to the high priest Caiaphas mentioned in the Gospels as presiding over the Sanhedrin trial of Jesus. Even more striking is a controversial ossuary inscribed, James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus, which, if authenticated, would be the only non-literary epigraphic evidence to directly name Jesus. Beyond this, rabbinic records in the Babylonian Talmud, such as Sanhedrin 43a, contain polemical references to the execution of a man called Yeshu on the eve of Passover, a hostile but historically significant acknowledgement from Jewish tradition. Archaeological excavations in Jerusalem, Galilee, and Capernaum further corroborate the geographical setting of the Gospels, showing that the social structures, synagogue buildings, and settlement patterns match the realities of the 1st century. Thus, even though not all of this evidence mentions Jesus directly, the combination of archaeology, inscriptions, and non-Christian written testimony produces strong cross-confirmation that Jesus was a historical figure, executed under Pontius Pilate and remembered by multiple communities in the 1st century. When this is compared to early Islam, the contrast is striking. For its central figure, Muhammad, and the first caliphs such as Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman, there is no contemporary material evidence explicitly naming them in an official capacity in the 7th century. The first public evidence clearly containing Quranic text appears nearly 60 years after Muhammad's death in the Dome of the Rock inscriptions, while the first full biography of Muhammad was compiled more than a century later by Ibn Ishaq. In other words, the early history of Jesus is supported by diverse external sources and material evidence relatively close to his lifetime, whereas the early history of Muhammad relies almost entirely on internal tradition written long after the events, without comparable contemporary corroboration.